Now, there's probably some really outdated policies that should be changed. But for example, changing with the times. Just because there's policies doesn't mean everything is handled correctly.
That's true.
The Me Too movement, for example, right? But one of the things that came from that, and this is just one, and there were many changes in the Screen Actors Guild, was, okay, times are changing. Policies have to be tougher, and environments have to be safer and more comfortable. So, for example, one of the things that came out of that was, it's Hollywood, right? If there was a kissing scene or a love scene, it's just the actors and the director like, do this, and pushing them to get whatever he wanted. And sometimes pushing people way past their comfort zone or what they'd agreed to do. So one of the new policies that SAG instituted, as an example, was from that point on, after the Me Too movement, they said, we have to create a brand new position. On every set, when there's an intimate scene, there has to be an intimacy coach. That means someone other than the director, the producer, or anyone else who's wielding power gets to talk to each of the actors involved, make sure they're comfortable, orchestrate it in a way that keeps everyone feeling safe.
Welcome to MetaGagement, the HR show that dives deep into the heart of employee engagement and workplace culture. Your hosts, Ann Scottlin and Dr. Lyman Montgomery, bring you a groundbreaking show that explores innovative strategies and insights to transform and elevate your organization's HR practices. Dr. Montgomery is an employee engagement expert and best-selling author, while Ann Scottlin is an acclaimed business consultant and podcaster. Together, they will unpack the complexities of modern HR challenges and reveal innovative solutions that can be immediately applied to your workplace. Please welcome Ann Scottlin and Dr. Lyman Montgomery.
Welcome back to MetaGagement-HR, the podcast that's all about shaking up the status quo in human resources and really infusing your work culture with innovation, with insight, using neuroscience to make things easier, not just different. I'm Ann Scottlin, and this is my co-host, Dr. Lyman Montgomery, and we are thrilled to have you here today as we dive into another episode that is definitely going to help you elevate your HR game. That is what we want. Right, Lyman?
It's so amazing to be doing this. Can you believe that we're on part 4 already of this 4-part series?
No, I know. It's amazing. This 4-part series that we've been doing on toxic employees and how to create a better workplace culture that's less toxic, and also to help prevent that beginning in the first place. And this, our last and 4th episode, is about building bridges, not barriers. And this is going to be a lot about feedback culture, right? Isn't it?
Yes. A lot of organizations, they make the mistake in saying, you are an employee number. And they're really setting up barriers, or they put, arms of separation. And what you really want to create are these bridges, these stepping stones, so that people feel supported and not feel that they're just a commodity. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yes. And just having people feel like they are important and not just, as you said, a commodity, not just tools to be used. Sorry, that could go badly. But one of the main things we want to talk about today is how to create that positive work environment. But before we do, we just want to thank all of you, our listeners and viewers, for joining us here today on MetaGagement-HR, where our purpose is to make the possible probable. So breaking out of old patterns and finding ways to be more resilient and adaptable within HR or in any professional environment, or even any environment, to be fair. We talk a lot about Thanksgiving dinners and other crazy things here on this show. So before we jump in, please do us a favor and like this episode, subscribe if you would please, and drop us a message on the website at metagagement.com or here in the comments below. We would really love to hear from you. And yes, please give us questions that you have that you would like to hear us answer here. So diving in, creating a positive work environment, Lyman, one of the things that is very important about this is establishing a zero tolerance policy for toxicity. Wow, that's impossible. Tell us a little more.
That is so key. When you set very clear, and we've said this in just about every episode, when you establish clearly defined expectations, that's the first part of setting expectation. The second part of that is making sure that there are clearly defined consequences for violating those expectations. Certain behaviors, you need to set a zero tolerance policy, especially toxicity. And what do we mean by that? A zero tolerance. It must be communicated that we value a respectful workplace, so we will not tolerate demeaning someone, calling someone out of their name based on race, sexual orientation, or diversity of thought. If someone has a difference of opinion, we will not tolerate someone. You know what? You're stupid. You're a jerk. You are an a-hole. We're not going to tolerate that. Every person has a right to be heard and equally to be respected. So that's what we mean. We talk about establishing a zero tolerance policy and also practice for or against, I should say, toxicity.
So here's a scenario for you. Well, I'm pulling out of thin air, but actually not real life because I've seen this happen. So I love to play the devil's advocate, right? So we're talking about no toxicity. We're talking about calling it when you see it. If you're in a meeting room or online or in a boardroom, you see if there's toxic behavior happening. Sometimes you see it if you're passing in the hall. You see other people off to the side. You kind of get the vibe. You feel that something is happening. What about toxicity that's happening between individuals when the individual being abused, for lack of a better word, doesn't report it? What are ways we can kind of look for these things because they're worried about repercussions, or perhaps the person abusing them is their boss? These are the things that tend to get swept under the rug. So let's just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, in situations like that, first of all, they are difficult for that very reason that you've outlined. They don't get talked about. They're swept under the rug. The person may fear some type of retribution, retaliation. They may be looked upon as creating a problem. They might feel a sense of rejection from the team. We had a good thing going here. What are you doing? You're upsetting the apple cart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do in those situations? In those situations, I found that there are basically three pathways that a person can take. The first pathway is to reach out to an objective third party. That might be the HR department. Okay. Let's say there isn't an HR department. It might say, you know what? If it's a small, let's say, group organization where the owner is the HR person, is bookkeeping, et cetera, real small type of organization, then what you may have to do is say, you know what, let me reach out to someone that I trust and get their opinion of how I should go about dealing with this to create at least a conversation. Because at some point, you're going to have a conversation with the individual, especially with a small organization. And there is not an internal grievance process. All right. And I understand there's a lot of companies where you don't have an HR department or an ombudsman or some type of dotted line connection that you can go to advocate for you, or a union. So that's number one, is trying to find an ally, someone that you can share your concerns with, that can, sort of mediate and give you some suggestion. The second pathway, yes.
Oh, go ahead.
The second pathway is to write down exactly what you're feeling and to validate those feelings with an action. For example, I feel stressed, but what am I going to do about feeling stressed? I feel overwhelmed, so what am I going to do? And when you put an action next to that feeling, it gives you further insight rather than just dwelling in your feelings. For example, if I'm feeling overwhelmed because I feel there is an unequal or unfair distribution of work, okay, the action is I may make a comment of saying, hey, we need to look at the amount of work that's being disseminated as an example. And a lot of times you bring awareness to the person, you know what, you're right. You were just so good at handling these types of problems. I was sending all of them to you. The last way that I would say of dealing with these is you have to basically make a determination if this is a good fit for you. And the answer might be no. And that's the reality. Sometimes the right answer is no, this is not a good fit for me. I need to seek employment somewhere else. So, number
So I
one,
think,
find an ally. Number two, write down your emotions tied to an action. And number three, make the tough decision if this is the right fit for you.
oh, that's great. No, I really like that. And I think that makes sense because people have to have the ability to complain, not complain, leave. But I think what we can do in a workplace, if you have some control, if you're in management, if you're in HR, is we talked earlier in the episode about not letting toxic
Right.
behavior take root to begin with. Is the greatest thing that you can do to prevent that is intentional transparency. And I don't just mean transparency in general communication. I mean, every time you get together, even if you make it a joke, it's like, we remember, everybody, we are open, honest, have a little one liner that the company uses that's, no
Mhm.
toxicity allowed. Let us
Yeah.
help you, help each other. My door is always open. As you know, we're not going to wait for any problems to start. There's 35 or 3,500 humans in this company, so we know it's going to happen. So let's know exactly what's going to happen in advance. And yeah,
Creating a sign that says toxic free zone. And literally
I
putting
know.
that on a board, writing it on a board. This is a toxic free zone, you
Yeah,
know?
I see it as like getting the little plastic signs printed
Yes,
and actually putting them like next to all the exit signs or whatever in the whole building.
you know, and
um,
just have fun. You're right. It
yeah.
reinforces what you want to communicate and what you expect of your team and of your employees.
So what do we do to enforce a policy like this consistently across the organization, though? Zero tolerance policy for this toxic behavior.
Yeah. I think you have to communicate it. I think you have to practice it. You have to demonstrate it and you have to live it. It has to become part of your culture. And people have to see that there are consequences, physically see that there are consequences when this policy is violated. Now, it doesn't mean that people necessarily are terminated, but it could be when someone violates that respect, for example, respect. Hey, remember, this is a toxic free zone. We don't allow that type of conversation. So if you're going to address someone, do it respectfully. Don't call people out their name. This is a toxic free zone. Everybody clear with that. That's the way you reinforce it. That's the way you live it. More importantly, don't let them see you as the leader being toxic and talking about someone else using disparaging remarks. So you have to model and demonstrate what you inspect. I always say inspect what you expect.
Inspect what you expect, because it's so much about trust.
It
And as
is.
we always say, leading by example. But trust is broken not just between you and the other person. They don't know it yet. But when you start, saying unhelpful things about other people in the company, they instantly know. Don't you know, when we're at a big family reunion or anything else, you're like, well, if Aunt Betty is bad mouthing Aunt
Yeah.
Jennifer, then we got to know that they're also bad mouthing me when I walk away. You got to expect that's coming. And even if people, maybe you feel like you're the inside person. So some toxic leaders do this, right? They
Right.
make you feel like you're the
Right.
inside person and that they can confess to you all the other sins of going on in the company and like all the other bad behavior, and they confide in you. But what that really should be doing is sending red flags, unless that's part of your job description to have those
Yeah.
conversations. That's red
Yeah.
flags that, you know what? if someone badmouths anyone, they're also going to badmouth you at some point. So you need to just remember that and see what you can do to create a more healthy
Right.
experience.
There's a saying by the great political strategist James Carville from Louisiana, and only Louisiana Cajun can say this. He said, never get in a fight with a skunk, because even if you win, you come out stinking.
That's awesome. Yes. Yes.
And that's what happens when you are engaging with toxic people. You might win the argument, but boy, that stink is going to blow back on you.
It is going to blow back. I was just saved by a hair a couple of weeks ago when I went out at 11 o'clock at night to put my dogs in the backyard, and I swung open the door and I looked, and the dogs were behind me. Fortunately, I didn't let them run out in front of me. And there in the middle of the yard, and it's a small area, was this huge skunk with his tail facing me. And he instantly saw me and started trying to get away, but it's a hard fence to get under.
Yeah.
And so I quickly ran back in and closed the door. And I was like, if I hadn't stuck my head out and checked, I would have been, my dogs would have been, all my new air conditioning units that have been put in that day would have been. So yes. And I think checking, check for the skunks.
Yes. Yes. They're not your friend. Remember the cartoon, I'm aging myself, even though this is bad for HR. There used to be a cartoon called Pepe Le Pew. And, he was a skunk but fell in love with this sort of tuxedo other cat. But he was really kind of a predator because he was doing some things that, probably bordered on sexual misconduct, unwanted advances, things of that nature. But the point being is sometimes we are trying to engage in conversation debates with people that have skunk-like personality. And like I said, even if you win, you're going to come out stinking.
That's my saying for the day. Now I'm going to write that and put it on my computer. So one of the really important things before we go to the break here in a minute or two is reviewing and updating policy regularly, because I think unless we are ensuring relevance, what we're trying to inspire in the community is not going to be effective. If you're using old tools and old rules, it's not necessarily going to apply in the workplace, and a new generation is going to come in and they're going to have found their own ways to be toxic that maybe you don't even recognize.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that unfortunately is the last thing that ever gets updated are our policies, our handbooks, our SOP, which is standard operating procedure. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, some intern from the university needed an internship, and we said, what's the work? Oh, you know what? Your internship is helping us put together our employee handbook. That was 20 years ago. That was 10 years ago. It hasn't been updated since then. And there are some organizations that are literally hundreds of years old, and their policies. I remember I was consulting with one major organization that's over 150 years old, and their policies had not been updated, I kid you not, since 1981.
That's crazy. So much has changed since 1981. And that intern, by the way, that might have been the summer intern putting that together, had no real life work experience yet.
No.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of companies just took a policy book from a previous employer and just changed the names and put it into practice. And we don't even know how old that one was.
Policies really should be updated on an as-needed basis. When something changes, laws have changed, regulations have changed, maybe your culture has changed. And I've seen people, they get inundated where they have 150 policies, where in reality, they may only need 5 to 10 policies for the size of their organization. Now, I will say, and we can talk about this when we come back from the break, because I know we're right up against that break. And we could talk about the 5 major types of policies any organization should have.
Excellent. Oh yeah, no, I would love to talk about that and see what else we can do to keep that policy regularly updating. And my last comment before we go on the policy updating was, you can't wait until someone yells change. There has to be a policy to review regularly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will miss the changes. And employee feedback is huge in that. Employee involvement in that review process is incredibly valuable. All right, we're going to jump out here for a quick break. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, copy and paste this link and send it to someone else who might love hanging out with us for a little bit and talking about how to make the workplace a better and healthier place to be by going meta. We'll be right back.
Get ready to unlock your full potential and transform your vision into reality. Go beyond traditional employee engagement to focus on the whole person with the focused Meta Mindset system. Experience real, measurable progress towards personal and professional goals. Dr. Lyman Montgomery and Anne Scottlin provide tailored guidance and support to help you overcome obstacles and thrive. Join them for their engaging events, like the Lunch and Learn webinar series, and experience the future of employee engagement. Visit MetaGagement.com now to get started today.
Welcome back to MetaGagement-HR. So happy to have you hanging out for a few minutes here today with myself and Scotland and the marvelous Dr. Lyman Montgomery. We are, just to catch you up, if you're just joining us, we are in the episode 4 of a 4-part series we've been doing called Dealing with Toxic Employees. And today we're talking about building bridges, not barriers, how to create a feedback culture that really works. And one of the things we just talked about was updating policy regularly around toxicity and behavior. And we talked about how often those policies are not updated. And Lyman, you were going to give us 5 examples. Take it away.
Yeah. Basically, instead of having these, hundreds of different policies for everything, remember, policy is just a far-reaching, think of it as an umbrella, right? That governs basically 5 key areas. For example, when should we come to work? So attendance policy. How should we act when we get to work? Behavioral policy. Well, what if I need to leave, because I get sick? There's a leave policy. Well, what about the work? My pay. There's a pay policy. And then the last policy is really about how the work is to be done. Whether, it's shared governance, if it's a union shop, or if it's top down, or if it's more of a collaborative type of policy. We manage through teams, or we manage through a collaborative effort. So again, those are the 5 basic policies that any organization should have. If you just think about it, how do I get to work? What do I do at work? What happens if I have to leave or have an accident? Oh, pay, that's important, right? So how do we get paid? When do we get paid? So really, those 15, 20, 30 policies are probably unnecessary. They're probably redundant. And again, it's going to be contingent upon the size of the organization. Instead of having all these, 10, 15, 20 policies, like I say, you don't really need 5 policies. Now that's for organizations, going to depend on the size, but really 5 key policies. You spend time in Hollywood, you're members of the Actors Guild, you have your, what is it called? Actors.
My SAG card.
Thank you, SAG card. I'm sure they have policies. Now how did that work in Hollywood? As far as they give you like an employee handbook, do you get like a policy manual when how does it work in Hollywood?
You do technically, and I don't even think they print it anymore. I could be wrong, but it's vast. It is like a law book at this point. But part of that is because they've created policies for every little thing, and as new things crop up, they adapt. Now, there's probably some really outdated policies that should be changed. But for example, changing with the times, just because there's policies doesn't mean everything is handled correctly.
That's true.
The Me Too movement, for example, right? A lot of things were mishandled, even for members of the Screen Actors Guild. And, you can't even imagine the stories that you would hear of the less mainstream actors and actresses that, before. But, one of the things that came from that, and this is just one, and there were many changes in like the Screen Actors Guild, was, okay, times are changing. Policies have to be tougher, and environments have to be safer and more comfortable. So, for example, one of the bizarre things that came out of that was, used to be, and it's Hollywood, right? If there was a kissing scene or a love scene, it's just the actors and the director like, do this, do this, do this, and pushing them to get whatever he wanted. And sometimes pushing people way past their comfort zone or what they'd agreed to do. So one of the new policies that SAG instituted, as an example, was from that point on, after the Me Too movement, they said, okay, we have to create a brand new position on every set. When there's an intimate scene, there has to be an intimacy coach. That means someone other than the director, the producer, or anyone else who's wielding power gets to talk to each of the actors involved, make sure they're comfortable, orchestrate it in a way that keeps everyone feeling safe. And I think that's magnificent. So sometimes we react to what's happening with the policy. It probably could have been anticipated earlier if people hadn't been afraid to look into it.
Wow. I did not know that, but that makes a lot of sense. We talk about change in policy. Sometimes there's a national movement that you look at and say, wow, you know what? This is a good place for us to review our policy to make sure that we have protections in there so that we can protect the people that we've hired, to make sure that not just physically protect them, but mentally and emotionally protect them as well. Great point.
And I think this leads right into continuing that conversation about feedback culture and a toxic-free environment. Part of that is implementing regular feedback sessions. Like, that is a critical element. And here we're talking about building bridges, not barriers. So building bridges means opening up the floor, creating an open communication zone, encouraging feedback. And what are some of the tools and techniques that people find the most helpful? I know sometimes 360-degree feedback, anonymous surveys are things that really help gather honest and constructive feedback, because you can have personal communication feedback, and then you can have, and that may be the answer for someone who was being bullied but didn't want to file a personal complaint. If you have anonymous feedback sources for people to pursue first level help, those things are really good.
Yeah. Generally, what I recommend, and you bring up a very good point, and that is, again, I'm going to talk about different sizes of organization, because we know our listeners, you may be with a large organization, you may be with a small mom and pop type organization. So we want to make sure it's relevant to everyone. So let's talk with the small mom and pop. That communication might be a meeting around a family table, okay, where you set the ground and say, listen, I'm not your boss right now. I'm John. I'm your brother. I'm your spouse. How am I doing as your supervisor, as your boss? And just having those conversations and allowing for constructive feedback. And I think if you preface it by saying, listen, I'm open to constructive feedback, but then you also have to make sure that your body language shows that you are open. You can't say, well, I'm open to constructive feedback, and your face is all twisted up and contorted. Boy, I can't speak. Contorted, and you look like you look like you're ready to go into a classroom, right?
Yeah. And those kids in school are always like,
right. I'm like, not mad.
I'm not causing any trouble. Why are you picking on me?
Right, right. And so I think that's one way. If it's a much larger organization, again, they probably have feedback loops. They probably have anonymous ways, ethics point, for example, if there's ethical concerns. There might be a person, if it's not, probably have an ombudsman's office that you can share those concerns with. So again, but as long as there is a system in place that allows people to communicate effectively, and those concerns are being addressed, I think it works out great. We normally see problems when that doesn't happen.
No, that's always when it starts cropping up, when it hasn't been anticipated or prevented. I think that's one of the really big things. And we were going to ask too about, we had a question come in about what are some examples of rewarding positive behavior and improvements? We'll go to that in just a minute. But, but first of all, as far as creating that open environment, I think this is where we, with our tools and our assessments that we use,
Yes.
approach things a little differently, which is MetaGagement, not just engagement. So going above, going beyond, and it's that anticipatory culture, the culture that anticipates change, that's watching for change, that creates an environment in the office that may offend some of the good old people in charge, but that everyone has an open floor. There's no toxicity allowed, that people can communicate freely, and encouraging that. In fact, requiring free communication without making people too uncomfortable.
Yes.
That's where you go meta. That's where it pushes everyone out of their comfort zone, including probably people in the C-suite. And yet it's such an excellent preventative action. We know preventative health and how that is so critical. And the same thing is, if you can prevent this by having an open communication environment, and that's what's really going meta. It's having the courage to open it up in advance of the problems. And we've seen that before in one of our surveys, that people said they usually wait for the problems, right?
Yes. And that's the truth of the matter is, most people wait until something happens. No, that's the very nature of HR. It's reactionary. Something happens, then HR gets involved. Imagine, again, going meta, if you could anticipate certain things. It's not difficult to do. Listen, if you see smoke and it's billowing, chances are there's probably going to be a fire. It's not that someone passed gas.
and this is why we are looking to build human resources, not HR for human reactions, not human reactions. We want to avoid the negative human reactions anyway. So yes, no, absolutely. If you smell smoke, if you start looking for the fire, or if you live in the Western United States in the summertime, you watch for smoke and fire even when there isn't smoke and a fire. And that's what I'm talking about, really going meta, because you anticipate the elements, the weather, what's going on in politics, what's going on socially, what's going on in Hollywood, what are the trends, what could cause a fire in your workplace because of your existing DEI makeup. What are those things that you can be watching for in advance?
Yes.
So watch for fire and smoke even before you just obviously see it, because it's right on top of you.
Right. And answering this question, are the conditions conducive for a fire to break out? You know, if you're in California and it's a drought and you have hay and it's 110 degrees and you decide to set a can of gasoline on the grass unattended, don't be surprised if you look out and there's a fire, okay? Or you left you're having a cookout and you left the lighter fluid out. Things like that happen. So the conditions sometimes might be conducive to toxicity, and being able to identify conditions, trends, and say, you know what, based on what we're seeing, this is more likely to happen than not happen.
So not just watching for the fire, but watching for the fuel. I think that was a huge
that's a good
takeaway right here. Not watching for the fire, but watching for the fuel, because that is where you get clues to allow you to go meta. And if you're in HR and you want to look like you are doing your job like the best ever in the company, these are your clues. Look for the fuel. Don't wait for the fire. I think
I think they call those accelerants. Like when you ever watch those crime shows dealing with fire, they're like, well, we know that the accelerant
watch for
it's a fancy word for gasoline or whatever.
It's so true.
Source. Right.
No, it is very, very true. And then real quick, and then we have to wrap up, but answering the question about what are some rewards that we can use for recognizing and positive behavior. What are some things monetary or non-monetary, that you might suggest in your company?
I'm a big believer asking people how do they want to be recognized, how they want to be acknowledged. And I think it's going to be based on, um, there's a great book called The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And one of the things he talks about is there are five love languages. He also wrote a book talking about the love language of the workplace. And I think you have to find out some people words of affirmation, other gifts. Okay. For some, it might be quality time. It's like, you know what? You can reward me by just being able to come in your office when I'm having a bad day and just having a sounding board. That means more to me than an extra $50 on my paycheck, as a bonus. Or it might be, what really, helps me is, give me a coupon to take my family to dinner so I don't have to cook. That would be, oh my God. You know, I can take the family to whatever restaurant, on the company, and I don't have to worry about, preparing dinner, leave work to go to work. And that's a real reality. That's reality for a lot of women, particularly, not just women, but a lot of times, let's face it, we still live in a society where a majority of women go to work and come home and have the responsibility of cooking and cleaning. That's just reality. It's starting to change, but if you ask most women, they feel like they're working 3 jobs. They go to a 9 to 5, and then they come home and work a 5 to 9.
Right. Well, and that's a great one. And I've seen that in some of the companies that I've been involved with, which in recent times, especially since COVID, especially since there's so many people in a remote culture, is food delivery. So they get a coupon for your local food delivery meals, however much is that for your size of your family or whatever. And you can have $100 of dinner delivered to your door. You don't even have to get the kids dressed and take them out. So there are great incentives, and something for another day, I think, would be when you offer incentives, but not everyone gets the incentive, then how do we also prevent favoritism? So I think in another episode, that would be a great one to explore. Absolutely. Because
I like that.
That's real life on the ground. How do we take that one meta? Well, we're already running up to the end here. I can't believe it. We're always having so much fun. We could just go on forever. So we talked about having a zero tolerance policy, about regular feedback, about really making sure you're giving recognition to foster that positive work environment, and build bridges, not barriers. HR wasn't meant to build uncomfortable barriers. It was built to make things more comfortable, to more smoothly, more enjoyable for everyone. So how can we do that in so many ways? And part of that is with the feedback culture.
Very well said. Very well said.
All right. Well, thank you, all of you, for listening today, for joining Dr. Lyman Montgomery and myself here. And we remember to always tune in or watch on whatever platform you are consuming this show. We stream Tuesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. That's 3 p.m. GMT for our friends across the pond. And as always, please comment, like, subscribe. We really love your feedback, and it really helps us bring you more of the content you need to elevate your HR game. So until next time, that's a wrap for Dealing with Toxic Employees, episode 4.4. And come back next time. We're going to have some new good stuff for you.
Take care.
See you then.
Goodbye.